We got to talk politics here, not just North Carolina, but also kind of sentiment as North Carolina voters are looking about how they feel about what's going on in the realm of the United States and how the country's going. We've got the CEO of John Locke Foundation joining us right now, Donald Bryson. Thank you so much for being with us here.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, really enjoy your insights. We are seeing now the survey here that's been done of potential or likely North Carolina voters coming up here on 2026. Of course, important to know is we're coming off of the most recent municipal elections. There was kind of a message, perchance, that was sent amongst some voting trends that we saw. But now folks are looking ahead to the midterms. And so we're seeing some numbers here and just kind of want to get your take on your thoughts on the general trends that we see, because we see this survey talking about not only whether folks expect to vote during the 2026 election, but how they feel politics in the country and the state of North Carolina are going.
Sure. And again, thanks for having me on today. We have a news division ourselves. We have a newspaper at the John Locke Foundation called Carolina Journal, and they do this poll. We work in concert with Harper Polling out of Pennsylvania, and do about 8 or 10 of these a year. And to answer your base question, how do people feel about the country and the state of North Carolina, is I would say that they're generally pessimistic, and they've been that way for a while, for most of the year now. Our poll came out this week, and it was done just over the weekend, and we got the results back on Tuesday. Indicates that people feel 55% of people in North Carolina feel that the country is headed on the wrong track. 38.3% say that the country is headed in the right direction. We see similar sentiment for the state of North Carolina, with 47.9% saying the state is on the wrong track, and 34.6% is in the right direction. Now, that is pessimistic, and it's not the best. But I will say it reflects that North Carolina is slightly more optimistic about the direction of the country than what we've seen from some national polling. There was an economist poll that came out just yesterday, as a matter of fact, where it said that 61% of those surveyed across the country said that the country is off on the wrong track, compared to 30% saying it's headed in the right direction. So I think the country is generally pessimistic, but North Carolina is slightly more optimistic in their pessimism.
I'm just kind of curious about, the demographics in your surveying and in your sampling, and in the sense that, when you look at different states, and obviously you can probably expect to see when you sample what is hopefully a representative population that would represent the population of the entire state. You might start to see a little bit more skewing on one side when you kind of consider political parties. North Carolina is interesting, I feel like, and the reason why we always tend to watch it during elections, because you do have quite a good mix of Republicans, Democrats, and unaffiliated voters. What are your thoughts as far as how your sampling was with that, and do you think that any of the trends that you saw as far as pessimism was influenced by the fact that maybe there was more of a certain political party that was kind of skewing the numbers? I'm just kind of curious about the kind of the backstory.
No, it's a great question. So our poller, Harper Polling, they do a really good job of trying to get our sample model based off of the most recent midterm election or presidential election year, depending on what we're polling. In this, it would be a midterm election. And so we try to get all the demographics to match that as closely as we possibly can. It's never perfect. There's a blend of science and art with polling, but that's how that is drawn. And then we draw names from the voter database, and people select in or out about whether or not they're likely voters. We only poll likely voters, and so that's how we generally do it. My takeaway from this poll is it's all about the economy. I think when you go further into the poll, and by the way, it's available at carolinajournal.com if people want to take a look at the top lines and the crosstabs. 58% of voters, a majority, are not confident in the U.S. economy. A plurality say they're not confident at all. In those demographics, we see that lower income voters have the least amount of confidence in the U.S. economy, which makes some sense. A majority of voters across the state are not confident in the U.S. economy, but confidence is highest, and this is interesting to me, in the Charlotte and then Winston-Salem, Greensboro television markets. Don't know why that is. Maybe things are going a lot better in Charlotte and in the Triad. But that's just an interesting breakdown in a way that, if I'm running a political campaign, say for U.S. Senate, that's something I would pay attention to. And then, but who do we assign blame to and why? That's interesting, because all this was going on during the government shutdown. A plurality of voters blame Democrats in Congress for the federal government shutdown. They're up about 5% over Republicans, but again, a quarter of voters blame both parties.
Yeah, that really is. I feel like that's an interesting takeaway, and also kind of the granular element that you called out earlier about the Charlotte and Greensboro markets. That is really, really interesting to see. The other thing that kind of caught my eye, and I'm glad you looked at the shutdown because obviously it was such a big topic for so long, not only here in North Carolina but nationwide. The fact that there are some political figures who are specifically posed in some of these questions. So it looks like you asked folks about Governor Josh Stein, about the president, Donald Trump, and also looking ahead to some of the races in the future. So I see, questions about Roy Cooper and Michael Whatley, as we know that Senate race is going to be very, very highly watched and probably highly spent when you think about the amount of dollars and cents that are going to be poured into that race.
Sure. Yeah, we did ask a lot of questions about specific, and that U.S. Senate race very well may be, a $900 million or $1 billion Senate race, which is just crazy to think about in terms of the money. Speaking about the president and the governor, it looks like the honeymoon period might be over for President Trump in North Carolina. He's the most well-known political figure on earth right now. There are very few people who don't have an opinion about him. Since we began polling his approval ratings when he came back in office earlier this year, but we polled this for the first time in March, there's been a 4-point shift from away from approve toward disapprove. So this poll had him at 52.8% disapprove compared to 45.7% approve. He had been just slightly above water back in March, and that's declined over time. The unsure has not changed hardly at all, but it's almost a like-for-like 4-point shift away from approve to disapprove. And so that's not way underwater, but it is in fact underwater. Similarly, we've seen a shift for Governor Josh Stein. He's lost about 6% of his approval rating and gained nearly 9% in his disapproval rating. But the thing is, he was already 35 points above water on his approval rating when we first started polling this back in March at 55% to 20%. This poll finds him with a 49.5% approval rating, so right around 50%, to 28.9% of disapproval. But I think the economy and Donald Trump are going to be the nexus of all of the elections happening next year. And of course, North Carolina has a U.S. Senate race. Former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper has put in on the Democratic side, and then Michael Whatley and a fellow named Don Brown have put in on the Republican side. Michael Whatley, of course, is a former North Carolina GOP chairman and then also former Republican National Committee chairman. And we have Roy Cooper leading both of those races, 47 to 39% over Whatley and 48 to 38% over Don Brown. I think that the big takeaway from that is that 38 to 39% is probably your base Republican vote. And whoever the Republican candidate ends up being, I think people would say Michael Whatley is the front runner, have a lot of ground to make up just to get name recognition and start appealing to voters about what the Republican message is.
Now, you mentioned a few moments ago, the president and also the economy. And I did see that y'all had a question about tariffs and how folks view the tariffs, whether they feel like this helps or hurts the economy, because we've been seeing this kind of dichotomy in messaging, as we would expect, split amongst party lines for the most part, about, this is helping, this is potentially going to be, a game changer in the long run. We hear from Republicans, including the president, and then from the Democrat side and other folks who have kind of split or splintered from their party in their views on the tariffs, saying that this is hurting folks right now and it will only continue to get worse. And I think about as we get closer and closer to the holidays, we talk a lot of shopping and gift giving and ways that we might start to see tariffs impacting us as we get into the holidays with our spending. Were there any interesting takeaways that y'all saw with the results on that question?
Yeah. Particularly we asked one question about if people will spend more or less on holiday spending. Of course, we're coming to that time of year, right, where we're all about to be in the Christmas rush, thinking about Black Friday. And I found it interesting that Black Friday deals have already started. But in our poll, 2/3, or 67% of likely voters in North Carolina say that they will spend less on the holidays this year compared to last year. That's not a great sign for the economy. Black Friday is important and is called Black Friday because that's when a lot of companies go into the black. But as it relates to tariffs do increase the cost of goods. There does seem to be a good bit of concern about that. When we ask people, do you think that that the United States imposing tariff helps or hurts the national economy? 53.5% said that it hurts, compared to 37.7% saying that it helps. But I think this is really the important question. When we said, do you think that the U.S. imposing tariffs helps or hurts your family's financial situation? 55.8% of people said that it hurts. 19.1% of people say that it helps. And so that, people are starting to think about the crunch of holiday spending. How do we make the dollar stretch as we go into the holidays and buy those gifts or the travel or whatever is involved? And I think people are concerned about that. And we've seen that message from the White House in the past few days that President Trump is going to need to get out there, according to them, and talk about cost of living.
Can you talk about the reason why y'all like to do these surveys and the insights that you hope to bring to folks, and who you hope will take these insights and do what they will with them? What is your goal in doing these surveys?
Sure. So, the John Locke Foundation is a public policy think tank. We study public policy in North Carolina. So people have probably heard of the Heritage Foundation or the Cato Institute or the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C. to study federal policy. And we do the same thing in North Carolina. And we've talked a little bit about federal stuff today, but we view polling as part of our research, in that it shows what is politically possible, what voters are concerned about, because it's very difficult to get anything done that is wildly unpopular with voters. It's easier to get things done that are popular with voters. We do live in a democratic republic. And so our primary audience would probably be lawmakers, and show them in real time what voters think about certain issues and what the political climate is. But we also just make it publicly available because, getting citizens involved in addition to businesses or other people that influence lawmakers helps educate the public policy process.
Now, as we look at these numbers, and you mentioned that this is something that y'all do pretty regularly, trying to keep a finger on the pulse of what voters are thinking. As we get closer and closer to midterms, how much of a swing do you expect to see with some of these numbers, specifically the ones that look at races? And I know it's hard to kind of crystal ball this, but I guess historically, if you will, do you feel like you tend to see really large swings over the course of a year? Is that very possible, or do you think that there are some cases where it might kind of hover around the same region, if you will?
I will anticipate on the U.S. Senate race that swinging dramatically. I can imagine Michael Whatley's number swinging 7 points very quickly, probably sometime around March or April after the primary elections that go on in early March. So I can see that going up. It's a matter of how much money is going to be spent early on. I think that right now, if putting on my crystal ball, I think this is likely a 50-50 race. It's going to be very expensive and very difficult. We've had, if you look back to the 1980s, a very popular Democratic governor, as Roy Cooper was, and Jim Hunt was back in the 80s, run for U.S. Senate. And that turned into at that time, the most expensive U.S. Senate race in North Carolina history. And that governor, who was popular, ended up losing that race and turned around and was elected to 2 more terms as governor, which is allowed under our state constitution. So looking back at history and knowing just how sort of strided North Carolina politics are, I think that this is going to be a very close race. I think, in my mind, I'm really curious about whether or not some of these third parties like the Green Party or the Libertarian Party might also field a candidate and throw a wrench in the plans of the 2 larger parties.
Yeah. It's always interesting. I'm sure you always have so much to dive into and think about, as you're doing these surveys, and also just thinking about why maybe sometimes you're coming up with these numbers. Anything you want to leave our viewers with before we wrap things up here?
Well, one, thanks again for having me on. If viewers want to take a look at our top lines and our cost tabs, we put the entire poll online. You can go to carolinajournal.com to view that poll. And if you ever get a phone call or an email inviting you to a poll, please take it, because we always hear feedback on our poll saying, well, nobody ever polled me. But if you don't take them, then you're not included in the sample, and we always value your opinion.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. CEO of John Locke Foundation, Donald Bryson, thank you so much for your time. Really interesting chat.